Hello and welcome to Practical Intuition with Kay. This is the show where we are always finding ways to help you really choose from your heart and tune out especially the unhelpful messages from your environment that may be coming in that may distract you from um, making the choices that really, really matter for you. I am Kay. I am a coach. I'm an adventurer. I'm an artist. And I'm really, really, really excited because today I'm here with Frederick Buskey. He is a friend. He's a colleague in the world of education and the world of like wonderfulness in general. Frederick, you to me are someone who is always prompting important thinking, like important reflections on like you have this wonderful capacity for taking complex feeling situations and really sifting them down to like the most important things, which are always going to be not about productivity or something like that, and are always going to be about heart and about the humans involved. And you have this wonderful podcast called is it called the Assistant Principal Podcast?
It is.
Yes, you've got that. You're writing a book. You crossed the Pennine Way earlier this year in 2023, and we've been able to kind of have some wonderful conversation about our experiences because we were in Northern England a little earlier this year, and I'm so thrilled to have you. Welcome, Frederick.
Oh, thank you. It's such a thrill to be here, and I've been looking forward to this conversation for 6 weeks.
Yeah, me too. Um, yeah, and I like coming into it when we were talking about what to talk about. I loved your idea, and I wondered if you wanted to dive right into to the thoughts that we had about conversation, or did you want to start earlier in your life? Like, how are you feeling about this conversation, and where we'll go right away?
I think I mostly want to dive in because I think the themes that will come out are things that may take us to those other places.
Yeah, I love it. Cool. So when did you do it, and what did you do?
So my wife Pam and I hiked the Pennine Way. We set foot on the trail, began the hike on June 11th of 2023, which was our 35th wedding anniversary.
Wow.
And then had 13 days out on the trail. We had one rest day. The Pennine Way is 270 miles, fairly challenging hiking, but fantastic pubs. And yeah, so that's what we did. I think there's kind of a preface to it that I'd like to share with listeners, if that's okay.
Please.
So I first read about the Pennine Way in 1985 or 86. I was a graduate student and I subscribed to National Geographic magazine at that time. And I remember they did this big issue on the Pennine Way. And I did a little bit of backpacking at that point, not a ton. And I don't know what it was that spoke to me, but I read that article, I devoured it. And when I finished, I said, someday I'm going to hike that trail. It was 1985. Pam and I got married in 1988. We talked about it then, but we got our careers started, got busy, and we were talking about it after we got things going. And then we had kids, and then like one thing leads to another. And we actually had our tickets purchased for summer of 2020. We've been working out. We were in great shape, and we all know what happened then. So 2023 was finally the chance to get there. So that journey waited like 36 years,
Wow.
I think, to wait to do that hike.
Wow. And well, I mean, there are so many similarities that come up between between your experience and Pam's experience and my experience, which was I crossed from the Irish Sea to the North Sea on the coast to coast path, which intersects the Pennine Way. I spent probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 miles on the Pennine Way because they combine in, I think it's Frith, Keld. I stayed at Frith Lodge in Keld. So,
Okay.
so and for me, this was decades in the making as well. I'd been reading James Herriot's books, All Creatures Great and Small is one of them, since I was 10 years old, and just so in love with the I'd always wanted to go to the Yorkshire Dales, and discovering that this path went through the Yorkshire Dales made it very, very motivating for me to do that. And like the realization of these dreams, that's a big deal.
It is. And one of the things that I was concerned about was how I would actually feel on the trip. Because when you dream about doing something for 35 years, you're building up a lot of anticipation. So that was my one big fear, I think, of how can this live up to the billing? I've been imagining myself in these places, and I've followed the Pennine Way this whole time, seeing things posted online, reading the guidebooks over and over and over again. So you see these, especially the iconic places. I mean, my computer screen right now is Penny Ghent. I've been looking at these places for so long, imagining myself there, and I thought, well, how is it actually going to feel to be there?
Mm. And how did it feel?
It was the best experience of my life. I mean, outside of getting married and having your kids born, this was the best, greatest experience I've ever had. And the reason is because I have never been so present in the moment for so long in my entire life. I'm a creative, so I can get into that flow state for a couple hours, maybe a day or 2 days max, where you're just totally dialed into something. But to be on a walk, hiking all day long, and never have a thought outside of the hike enter your head.
Yeah.
I had never experienced that before. I mean, it just was truly hard to describe.
And so this, I love this. Like, and this is something that we have connected on before. I've got 3 feelings words is how I think of them. And the state that I prefer to be in that, makes me feel good inside, and also helps me come from a supporting place, like, is that of joyful, patient presence. And when this was true for me too, walking the coast to coast path, I would feel so absorbed into the landscape, so there. I felt like I was the grouse, I was the blue snails, I was the grass and the rocks it was amazing. Like I have this phenomenon called my son has named it the eternal jukebox, which is to say that there is always, 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 always a song in my head. And it's been amazing, and it's also been a little bit frustrating. And for the first time in my life, you were on the Pennine Way, on the coast to coast path, like routinely when I was in the flow, there was no music in my head. There was just silence, and it was the most amazing feeling. And I'm not sure if this is true for you. I met folks and connected with folks who felt the opposite, who were not having the sort of like transporting journey that I was having, and that it sounds like you and Pam had as well. And I'm curious if you met folks like that, and yeah, I guess I'm just curious about sort of the feelings of doing the walk.
Well, I'll preface this by saying one of the big lessons we took away is that you have to walk your own walk. Right. And so there were a number of days where we hiked for an entire day, or in one case, 2.5 days with somebody else. But even when we're hiking together, you still have to walk your own walk. So I don't know that for people that aren't experiencing that deep presence, maybe that wasn't their purpose, right? Maybe that wasn't the hike for them. But most of the people we met, I think, were very, very grounded. And the Pennine Way is long. I think the coast to coast was at about a 10-day, 12-day. How many miles is that?
I did it. It's 192 miles across. I did it in like 3 weeks, which is a longer time than typically gets taken. Yes, I think it's about 14 days or something like that. Yeah, the Pennine Way is longer than that, right? Like twice as long.
Yeah, it's 270. So 14 days is a blistering pace. We did 17 days, I think. So we were doing 14 to 20 miles a day. And a lot of people we had budgeted 22 days. And maybe it's that trail attracts a different kind of person, because if you have 3 weeks, you're probably either in a different stage of life, or you've made a different set of sacrifices to take 3 weeks off. Because the difference between taking 3 weeks off to go hike a trail versus 1.5 or 2 weeks off, that's a pretty big leap, I think. And so
Mm.
maybe the people that we just encountered were more like we were, where this was such a big deal that they were really immersed in it.
Mm. Well, this is really fascinating to me. I hadn't thought of it in quite this way. So I think I want to preface by saying I love the idea of everyone walking their own walk, like that everybody sort of gets to do this in their own way and have their own experience. And I mean, even the folks who struggled, like one person was telling me that they thought they were going to get all this presents, and what instead happened was they were having Neil Young songs in their head, like that they couldn't get out of their head. And and um and there was learning in that for them. I mean, they loved the hike. They loved it. And there was also this sort of like, this is really interesting, what's going on here, kind of a feeling. So not I guess not universally, but for the vast majority of folks were like, I am so fortunate to be able to do this. Like, wow. And it's always fun to kind of compare, or well, compare is the wrong word. Share stories maybe about and hear about the different perspectives. I was the longest person that I knew taking the time to do the hike. And I don't know if this happens with the Pennine Way, but I knew folks who did half of it. And then like I met people in the first part of the trek that were doing their half of it. There's a gentleman named James that I keep in touch with. He picked up a pebble at the Irish Sea, and it's sitting on his mantle now so that he can grab it when he goes to finish. He got it halfway across. And then we met some people who started halfway and were finishing because they had done the earlier part earlier. So I think, to your point, I love this. People get to do it in their own way, and they make it work in their lives. They make it work. Like for me, I was incredibly fortunate to be able to take that time, like to take that 3 weeks. And I mean, my trip was like half crowdfunded so that I had the resources to be able to stay in inns each night. And like, I feel so lucky, and pretty well everybody that I met felt so lucky.
Yeah. So that kind of takes me to one of the leadership lessons. And I guess listeners should know my head is always going to leadership. Like I take everything I see in this world and try to see it through that leadership lens. And it was interesting being so present and not having all those leadership thoughts running through my brain. But at the end of the evenings we didn't do 20 miles. Pam and I would get in the tent and we'd actually talk through and think, okay, so what are the leadership lessons? Because the idea we'd played with was maybe we could write a book of just leadership things. I don't know why I felt like we had to do that. Maybe, again, my leadership brain. But one of the most immediate things that happened the first couple of days of the hike, we would wake up in a village, and inevitably you'd have to climb out because the villages are all in valleys.
Yep.
So we'd have this long hike out, and nothing opens when 9:30 or 10 o'clock for breakfast or anything like that. So we usually get up and get out by 7:30, 8 at the latest, because we had a long way to walk. So we wouldn't really be able to do anything in the morning in town. We'd get up, we'd hike, and then we'd get into town in the evening and hopefully be able to catch a shower, go to the pub, have a beer, and then done. And Pam kept saying, I want to spend time in the town. So we'd come through a town around, lunchtime or at some point during the day. And she goes, can't we walk around? And I'm looking at the clock thinking, well, it's going to be dark in this amount of time and we have this many miles to go. And so there was some tension there that developed between us the first couple of days. And one morning I got up and I said, okay, look, I think let's look at our schedule and figure out how we can make this work. And she said, no, it's okay. I figured out that we're here to hike. We're not here to visit villages.
Mm.
And as we process that through, there's a big difference between doing a village tour and hiking from village to village versus doing a hiking tour in which you pass through villages, because the purpose is different. And I think so many times we get on a journey, whether it's a journey at work or a journey into ourself or whatever it is, we get into that journey and we forget the purpose of why we're actually doing it. We get so caught up in the journey. And when we lose sight of what the real purpose is in us doing that journey, I think it makes it harder to connect and more easy to start thinking about the regrets or the bad things because we actually forgot why we're doing this.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, that makes so much sense. And it's a lesson that can apply to so much as well. And I know for myself, so one thing that I did differently from a lot of people, especially a lot of women, was I did it on my own. And so I could make it be whatever I wanted. There was not another person to sort of discuss that or whatever. And what I discovered was I wanted to walk by myself. I was not like the few times that I did walk a mile or two with companions, because you meet people. I'm sure you did too. You meet people along the way, and I would see them at night and, once in a while, often on the trail, but not to walk with, because I discovered that walking with folks like drained me of energy. It was it was so different. And so I was really able to stay in the space of like what I wanted. I think it's really interesting and cool that you and Pam saw challenges, things came up that between you that you could, look at head on and address. And I feel like that's a part of this too, knowing what you are doing it for. Like, why are we here? What is the purpose? And then being able to articulate it, especially if you are in a situation where you're not alone. Being able to articulate it to ourselves, yes, that's an important thing. Being able to work with your team is also, that sounds like a little bit of what you're speaking to.
Yeah, and I think there's some give and take in there as well. We did meet a lot of people and did hike chunks of the trail, either half a day, a whole day, 2 days with people. And so there would be that kind of push and pull. What does this person need from me? I have this mentality that I always want to be able to add value to people's lives. And so I try to be really present when people come into my life and attuned to how I can support them, not by giving advice or anything, but what kind of presence, do I need to bring? In what ways can I listen? What questions can I ask that will help them figure out whatever they're working on? And I love doing that, but it also takes from me sometimes, right? So I would be having a conversation with somebody, walking with a walking buddy, but what I really wanted to be doing was just out there in the silence, listening to the wind blow on my face and watch the cotton grass, wave back and forth in the moors. And so navigating that space between, okay, I'm fortunate enough to be able to give some things to people. So I feel like I need to do that, but then I also need to take care of myself. So just being really mindful. And again, the presence helps with that, right? Because I can know, yes, I can pour into you now, but if I'm really present to that, then I know when I've hit that half water mark and I can say, I'm either going to slow down or speed up and and I'm going to walk on my own for a little while. So
Yeah, that's how wonderful to be so attuned inside.
I should say I try. It's what I aspire to. I'm not always that attuned.
Well, I mean, I think it's about, I think the way I think of it is it's not about perfection, right? It's about well-being and working towards
Yeah.
well-being. So, um, and I mean, there's so much that I want to ask about that I'm curious about, trying to sort of, you know, bring our conversation along. Whew.
I have one that
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can
yeah.
I can I jump in?
Yes.
So there's a section of the Pennine Way where it intersects with, I think it's the South Tyne Trail.
Hmm.
And the South Tyne Trail is straight. It runs next to a set of railroad tracks, and it's just this nice, easy, gentle trail. And it mirrors the Pennine Way, except on the Pennine Way, which is the other side of the tracks, it meanders back and forth. It goes over sheep fence, over sheep fence, over sheep fence. And it's just, I read about that section of the trail just being a royal pain. It's not fun, and it's just lots of work. We were tired that day, so we decided to do the South Tyne Trail, which is just a little bit easier. And so it's about, I think it's maybe 6 miles that you're on the South Tyne, and then you just pick up the PW again. So we're hiking down the trail, and in the middle of the trail, all that's here is woods, railroad tracks, and this trail. Sitting in the middle of the trail is a green balloon. And it is so out of place. And I thought about, wow, there's a story behind this green balloon. How
Mm.
did it get here? Why is it here? Now, it so happens that a train had passed us going the opposite way. And on one of the cars, we saw a bunch of people celebrating a birthday, and they had balloons in the car. So I knew when I saw that green balloon, I knew where it came from, and I knew why it was there and how it got there. But I think so many times when we talk about leaders, we go into an organization, we're the new person, we come in, we're the leader. So we're trying to fix things, change things, make things better. And we see these things in the organization that don't seem to fit. And I think so many times our inclination is, well, that doesn't belong here. And we don't pop that balloon.
Mm.
But we don't know how it got there. We don't know why it's there. And I caution leaders, when you see something that doesn't make sense, that you don't think needs to be there, don't just pop it. Figure out the story first, because that green balloon might be really important to somebody, or there might be a really important reason that it's there.
Yeah.
But I love that. I call it the lesson of the green balloon.
That is great. And it brings to mind like the many different capacities in which someone is a leader. That's the other thing that I feel like, you and Pam are leaders in terms of planning and executing on this incredible trip. And you lead in the education space. And a lot of our listeners are educators. A lot of them are parents too. And some of them aren't, like, but we all have these places in our lives where we could be taking, or we are in leadership roles. And I'm wondering how that has kind of played out in your life. If we can go a little more in the direction of like regular life. I'd love to hear about like how, not necessarily just about how you're a leader, which would be amazing, and also like just what are the, I don't know, circumstances in which leadership shows up for you.
That is a complicated question. It's interesting because I was doing a training with some nonprofit leaders yesterday, and one of the things that we were talking about was the ability to leave your leadership at the door.
Mm.
So to walk away from your work. And I think when you're a leader, that means something different. And I guess I should back up and say what's leadership? So John Maxwell, who's one of the big leadership thinkers of the 1990s and 2000s, said that leadership is influence, nothing less, nothing more.
Mm.
I will quibble with that, but the idea that leaders influence others is critical. There's 5 basic forms of power, and power is how you influence people, right? When you push, when you use power, you're influencing people. There's 5 basic forms of power. Only one of those forms is limited to being in a hierarchical position. 5 of the 6 forms of power, including the most important ones, are not tied to any kind of a hierarchical position. So I
Mm.
talk about leadership as the leader a lot because I work with principals and assistant principals who have that hierarchical position. But when I think about leadership, when I conceive of it, that's anybody who wants to intentionally influence somebody else to achieve a specific outcome. We're talking about leadership.
Mm. Wow. I mean, that really brings me back to the heart of coaching, which there's a coach named Rich Litvin who talks about how you can substitute in the word leadership for the word coaching.
Mm.
And what is at its heart, what is good coaching, right? It's helping someone uh see what's inside themselves and um influencing in that way is really there's an intersection here that I think is kind of cool and juicy and like, do you see that intersection, I guess?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we can talk about what influence, what leadership you exert by having a podcast,
Mm.
right? So there's nobody that's forced to listen to your podcast, as far as we know.
Yeah, it's not required listening.
Yeah. So you don't have any legitimate power. So all of your power is non-hierarchical. First of all, people are probably listening because they learned something from your podcast. So they tune in because they see you as an expert that can help them learn stuff that's important to you. So that's one of the most important forms of power is expertise. So anytime that we can help teach somebody something else that is going to be beneficial to them, we are using a form of power.
Mm.
And we will even say, I listened to, oh, that was such a powerful podcast, right?
Yes.
That was such a powerful show because it impacted us. So there's that expertise power. There's also reward power. And I would suspect in your shows that people hear things frequently that confirm the way they are doing things, which is a way of rewarding, right? Because
Mm.
if I say, if you're doing this, you're doing a great job. And I so appreciate the audience coming in. You must be really passionate about what you're doing here because you're taking the time to invest in your own growth. I'm handing out rewards every time I do that, right? Because I'm acknowledging and praising to an extent what somebody's doing right. So reward is another power that you're able to use on a podcast. And then the other one that is, in my mind, the most important power is called referent power. And that's the power that our parents have over us because we don't want to displease them, right?
Mm.
And our mentors, the people that we want to be like, that we want to emulate, that we just appreciate and respect so much. And I think a good podcaster can cultivate that referent power over time, right? And I would say each of us actually has some influence on each other now, as we've only known each other a couple months, but we value each other and we
Mm.
respect. And I can think, boy, I really like who Kay is. I respect the humanness in her and the way she comes at things. And I really don't want to say anything that would kind of go against the values that she's espousing, because I think those values are important. And in fact, I want to be part of that work, or I want to confirm that. And so we're influencing each other in powerful ways that are tied to that reference part of it.
This
So we
is
can
really,
cultivate a lot of that through podcasts.
yeah. I mean, well, it's so fascinating too, because for me, podcasts are conversations. There's simply conversations that have been that have been recorded and that people can listen to outside of the conversation. And I am really enjoying the idea that folks are here, that they're sort of voting to be here, not for any hierarchical reason, but because they just genuinely want to be along on this ride. And I learned so much from them too. Like there's so much in here that leadership is not a one-way street. I think it's really, I think the certainly the leaders that I admire, learn from their experiences and share their experiences. And so Frederick, I mean, I think this is exactly where I think of you, because like when I first was connected with you in LinkedIn, you were sharing over a period of days this really interesting story about the time on the Pennine Way when you and Pam were basically hedged in by horses, buildings, and like you there was nowhere to go if you were going to go forward. And like I was like, this is the most incredible story. What is going? I was on the edge of my seat for like a week as that story was continuing to, and at the heart of it was what you learned. And it was shared in such an entertaining and really, really interesting way. You brought us along for the ride. That's the kind of influence that I think is very fun, effective, and makes me feel like I'm part of a community, not being sort of spoken to from on high. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not hierarchical at all. This is fascinating to me.
Well, you mentioned the daily email, and this week I totally by coincidence, I am diving into those different forms of power on my daily email. And today was about expert power. And I made the same point to my audience that I just did to you about the expertise that comes with, I think I said the email, not the podcast. People read a daily email every day. Why are they doing that? Because they think I have something to teach them. So I'm wielding that expert power. But I ended that email by saying, if you emailed me or if you booked a call with me and you were going to tell me about your experiences in schools or your organizations and what you were learning and what you were experiencing in your organization, you shared that with me, that would totally flip the dynamic, because now I go from expert to learner because I'm hearing your stories. That's how I learn. That's how I stay relevant, by listening to you. And so all of a sudden now you're the one with the power.
And I like, this podcast used to be called We Turned Out Okay. And I started it to share my sort of expertise as a teacher, an educator, someone who worked with children and parents for a long, long time. And I was never comfortable in that role of like, I'm the expert here. I'm giving the answers to the questions. And I eventually it is now Practical Intuition with Kay, because I just got to a point where I was so uncomfortable. It didn't feel like I wanted to be leading from a place of like learning and celebrating others and supporting them and their lessons. And like, it's interesting. I mean, it just mirrors, not that this is the place to get into this, but it really does mirror my own journey in for health reasons too. I mean, like there's so much in this that I feel so much better now that I'm a person who doesn't tell others about my fantastic, I don't know, answers to any questions, but instead asks questions and then listens and learn. And I get to be a learner and a celebrator of others,
I think there's this growth pattern that when we're really young and we're fresh into the world, and I'm including your 20s and probably 30s for some of us into that, like, we don't know what we don't know. We think we know everything. We think we have all the answers. So if somebody's listening and you think you've got it all figured out, you still have some space to go. And then you move into that phase where you know that you know what you know, and you recognize there's some limitations. And then I think you get into that phase where you know what you know, but you also know that there is so much that you don't know.
Mm.
You don't have all the answers. You have some of the answers. And that's the place I try to live in, but it's also like walking a knife edge, right? Because if you have some expertise and if you really want to impact people, you do have to embrace your expertise. I
Mm.
can't pretend that I don't know anything,
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Like,
right?
yeah.
We've got to be willing to put ourselves out there, and we've got to be willing to push a little bit and say, hey, look at this, right? This is something you can learn from. And so you have to embrace the expertise to a certain extent. But as soon as you think you've got it all figured out, I think then you start going the wrong way. And
Yeah.
so how do you leverage your expertise, use your expertise to serve others, but then stay humble enough to keep questioning and learning yourself, and acknowledging that you don't know. And even if I'm right with everything that I'm saying, it may not be right for a given individual in a
For
given
somebody
context.
else. Yeah. Yeah. That's very, very well said. Very beautifully said. And I think something that comes up is, and I've felt this from you, you're really good at creating a space where it is a space of openness. It is a space that you're welcoming someone else into, not from the place of I know it all, but from a place of like, I'm listening to you and I'm along on the ride and I have some experience, you know, if you would be interested in hearing about any of those experiences, right? Like, such an interesting
Yeah,
place.
there was a really big flip for me that occurred. I think I was probably in my early, mid 30s. And at that point, I thought I knew everything. I had all the answers. And I would say I was a leader, but my leadership was focused on convincing people to see the world the way I did, because I
Mm.
thought if everybody was just like me, we'd be okay, right? If we guys, the answer is right here. Just jump on board the train, which is actually a pretty common way of leading,
Mm.
right? I have the answers. Jump on my train. I'm going to sell you this and we're going to go. And that's not necessarily wrong or bad, but I was deep into that. And I read this article. I was in my doctoral program at that point, and I read this article by Milton Meyerhoff called On Caring. And I saw myself as a caring person, right? I was a caring person. I was just trying to make everybody like me. And Meyerhoff said, if you really care about people, then you try to understand the directions in which they want to grow,
Mm.
how they want to develop. And caring leaders will then help figure out how to help those people grow in the directions that they want.
Hmm.
That the real work of leadership is not taking away people's agency, it's giving them agency. And it's
Wow.
letting their agency drive your agenda. And that flipped it for me, because I realized if I really care about people, I have to stop making them to be like me. I have to start helping them go on their journey where they want to go, where they
Yeah.
need to go. And if we don't agree on that, then I need to be asking the questions that allow them to process that. And then I still need to trust the outcome in the end. And that transition, which didn't happen overnight, but that transition has made it not easier, but essential that in my conversations with people, I focus on trying to figure that out,
Mm.
right? What question, my favorite thing to do is ask questions. So, what question can I ask you that is going to help you start to answer the questions that you need answered?
Mm.
And the first step before I can ask any good questions is to listen.
Yeah. Yep. Wow. And I really want to say thank you for sharing that. The experiences that we have and the sort of the realizations that we come to, it's someone like you who embraces growth and embraces like development and understands that everyone gets to do it how they want to do it, and like, how can we be helpful as you are getting what you want? Like, such a such a fun place to be. And I'm curious how that comes into your well, where, like, who are the sort of folks that you are working with, or working for, or alongside right now, like in your work?
Part of my work is locally, we're developing a nonprofit governmental leader program.
Mm-hmm.
So I work in rural Appalachia. So we're very low resourced. Geographically, we're spread out, and we have a lot of really challenging problems around social situations and poverty and drug abuse and all the rest of it. And I work with nonprofit leaders who are amazing people, but most of whom have almost no formal leadership training, right? They're in leadership positions because they're willing to do the work because they have the passion and the heart for it. So we've put together a leadership initiative to get those kinds of people leadership development, but also to build a much richer network of connected leaders in our communities. Because again, we've got these big geographic expanses. So we're trying to connect people from small towns and in the backwoods and build up their networks so they have more, they can rely on each other more. They have more of that, I guess, interdependence where they can collaborate and pool their small resources and maybe create something better. So that's a big part of my work right now. And then the other side of my work is school leadership. That's where my whole background is. And I especially like to focus on assistant principals because I think they're the forgotten leaders. Right? Principals get a lot of attention because they're at the top of the chain within the school. The assistant principals are in that position where they're not teachers, so they're not getting all the support that teachers get. They're not principals, so they're not getting the support that principals get. And they're that person that is left to do everything. And so it's a very isolating job. And the job itself, a lot of assistant principals want to move into the principalship, but what you do as an AP doesn't necessarily prepare you for principalship. If you have a great principal, then you're in good shape. But a lot of people don't have great principals, or they have principals that turn over every 2 or 3 years. So I love that group of people. I think it is such a amazing, messy space full of potential to go play in.
Wow.
And the single biggest challenge for those folks is that everything in the job focuses them on tasks, but what they really need to be doing is focusing on people. So that's the heart of my work, is helping leaders, no matter where they are, helping leaders move from tasks to people.
And I think, as we're sort of, our time is it always goes so incredibly quickly. I'm curious what what does that look like? How do you help someone? How does someone go from focusing on the tasks that they do need to be done, that they're sort of required, right, to focusing on people?
So the essential thread, which has run through this entire podcast, if somebody goes back, and I'm going to say what I'm going to say, and if they go back and listen to the podcast, they're going to say, oh yeah, that was here, that was here, that was here, that was here. The essential piece is presence. If you are not present, you can't learn about people. You can't learn about what they need if you're not present. And you and I both know what we mean when we say present. I don't mean that physically we're together.
No.
I mean that right now there is nothing outside of our world besides you and I in this conversation.
Yeah.
I don't think either one of us is thinking about what chores or where I got to go or what I'm going to eat, or we're here for each other 100%. And that's what presence is. And when you're present, you can be there to serve people. You can be there to actually notice that green balloon, and you can overcome your natural impulses to pop it or kick it out of the way or whatever. Because you're present, you can say, wait, why? Right? This is here for a reason. Why is this here? When you're present, you can realize that there's conflict in the situation and start to process that and realize, oh, we're working on two different purposes. So let's think about that. Why did we, are we visiting villages, or are we taking the walk? Like, how do we do that? But if we're not present, all we feel is the tension. We don't really understand that tension. We can't interrogate it. So the first thing is being present. And then the challenge around that is building the structures in your life and implementing the habits that reinforce your presence instead of take away, because our lives are built around barriers that prevent us from being present. So the real work, before I can be present, the real work is changing the things around me so that I can get to that place and stay in it.
Wow. I mean, that was so magnificently said. Like, it's so true. I have this vision of you, the folks that you work with, and I'm sure live with, right? Like, having benefited from this, their lives, being able to bring to presence, come to presence, and be right there for the person in front of them. Like,
we try. It's always a dance. Right?
yeah,
And
well,
some days you're better than others.
yeah, yeah. Not well-being, not perfection, right? Yeah, like
Right.
it's working towards well-being. And I love that we've kind of come full circle, because the trip was so present for you. And when we first got to talking, you were not home for that long. Like, maybe it was within the first couple of months or something after you got home. And um and the lessons of that, of the staying present, I think I know for me it was very motivating, and it continues to be very motivating to do the things that are going to bring me there instead of being derailed. And I a curiosity that comes up is, like, so we're having our conversation, and just before we hit record, I was sharing about something in my world, something up in New England that's just happened. And sometimes really awful things happen. And I feel like I'm thinking about it now, because when we are leading, however we view that or feel about it, in our families, in our workplaces, in front of our students, on our teams, and things go very wrong, or things feel very, very sad or emotional or frustrating or whatever, how, like, well, I don't want to give the answer, but, like, if that was happening for you, or happening for someone that you worked with, like, how would you help them through it?
We have to know that somebody's experiencing trauma, right? Which goes back to that presence piece. And so some people carry that trauma on their sleeve. They walk in the door, and a lot of us are really good at hiding it. And so as we move through this world and we encounter people, we don't know with any given person what trauma they're carrying that day, or what scars they're carrying from before. So I think being mindful that all of us have experienced trauma, and some of us carry it more recently or more deeply than others. So the first step is to be aware of that. You don't know what's going on in anybody's life unless you're deep in the conversations with them, which is why we need to focus on people, not tasks. When we're present, we create the space for people to either share that, or at least to feel valued.
Yeah.
And I think when people are hurting like that, they're in different places. They need different things. And as leaders, what we should understand, number one, is to be fully present with someone is a great gift. And people know when they are receiving that gift. And so if somebody is hurting and you stop and you take time to be with them, you may not even know they're hurting. You don't have to know. You don't have to address it. Just being with them is the gift. If I'm hurting, but I know that you're here with me, whether you know my trauma or not, you're signaling to me that I matter.
Yeah.
And I think that is healing in and of itself. And I would caution people to not try to fix things. Right? If
Mm,
I'm in pain, you don't need to tell me it's all going to be better. Don't give me the answers, just be with me
yeah.
and take that. And I know, as you know, as we're recording this, it was just the shooting yesterday in Maine where you live.
Yeah. Yeah.
I grew up in um, in a community with lots of Jewish families in my community. I think I went to daycare at the Jewish Community Center. My middle name is Hebrew, but I also lived for 3 years in a Muslim country. And this violence in Israel and Palestine has affected me extremely deeply.
Mhm.
And I try to put on the face so that nobody sees that, but the trauma's there. And so I think we're all carrying things at different times. And what I need from people, what I've needed is just for people to be present with me. I
Mhm.
don't need to process my trauma. Some people might need that at times. I don't need that right now. I just need to be with people. And I need people to communicate to me that I have value
Yep.
by being present.
Yeah.
So I feel like in a way that's a kind of a cop-out answer, because it's there's not like there's no meat to that. At the same time, it doesn't get any meatier, right?
I mean, I hear you, and I appreciate that. It almost doesn't feel like enough. It's like if you're the person who's watching somebody go through something, you want to fix it for them. You want to do right everything you can. And part of my life's journey is understanding like the importance of doing what they want, not what I want for them. Right. And I what you are talking about puts me right in mind of Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Now, kids are watching Daniel Tiger, and there's this great documentary about Mr. Rogers. I think it's called The Good Neighbor, but I could be wrong. That could be the book. Anyway, it is a fabulous documentary that starts with um, King Friday the 13th, uh, putting basically the I forget what it's called, the kingdom of make believe, maybe is what it's called, into like lockdown. I mean, he puts up barbed wire fences. He is losing his mind because there's change coming. And like it's it's a reflection that kids can understand, and a sort of a creating of a safe world where kids can look at scary and hard things. Like that's how Mr. Rogers got started. It's not which just really surprised me because I grew up watching Mr. Rogers, but I don't remember. I remember the feeling of love and wonderfulness because he does create this beautiful space, and he is such a listener and such a present, holds such presence for kids. And there was a moment on that show. So others help King Friday the 13th figure that situation out. Like they open the borders, it's all good. And it's done in such a way that makes kids feel safe and a little bit gives them a little bit of an understanding that they can handle about big world things, right? But then there's when President Kennedy, I think, was assassinated. There is a scene from the land of make believe, um, where Daniel Tiger is really sad and really upset, and Lady Aberlin is talking with him, and they're blowing up a balloon. Like there's this subject, a balloon coming up again, and Daniel Tiger is not understanding what's going on, and he's really scared and really upset, and they talk about it for a bit. She listens to him for a bit, and then she reassures him about how special he is. She actually sings him a song about how special he is. And then she says, if you want, he says, I don't want to talk about this anymore. And she says, you know what? You never have to talk about it if you don't want to. And I'm here if you do want to talk about it. Like it's all about holding space and doing what that person wants or needs. And I have goosebumps, Frederick, because this is so your wheelhouse. This is so like you, it feels like.
I think it's my hope for the world, and I view this as a really not a great time for our world, but when you realize how much destruction one person can manage,
Mhm.
especially when they can influence other people, when you imagine how much damage one person can manage, but you look at how many wonderful things there are in this world,
Mm.
you realize that for every terrible person out there, there have to be 9,999,999 good people. So that's the first part of the equation, is the good people absolutely overwhelm, outnumber the negative people. The other thing is the difference that one person, one connection can make.
Mm.
And we start to dig into the research on school violence and school shootings. The consistent theme is that people that wind out carrying out their plans are completely isolated.
Yep.
And people that maybe have those violent thoughts but don't act on them have somebody that connects with them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hope, right? That's the great message, that we can connect. Every one of us has the power every day to make some kind of a connection. When I'm going through the checkout line at the store, I have an opportunity to try to connect with that cashier, that clerk that's checking me out. I have that opportunity. I can choose to try to connect. I can choose to try to connect when I'm picking up my box at the post office or wherever I am. We have those opportunities, and we just have to choose what we're going to do with them. And if enough of us choose wisely and choose to give a little bit of ourselves, we can have a lot more impact than we ever realize.
Yeah. Oh, wow. This is like, yes. I'm thinking about a couple of ideas that have been really helpful for me when bad things happen. And one is, when people feel good, they do good things. And when people feel bad, they do bad things. Like and the connections that we have with each other, the smile when you were, when you were the smile that or the wave, like on my walk, a lot of times I wave at, I mean, everyone, like, and having conversation with people, just smiling at people feels so good inside. And then when you get that back, it is a connection that's established. And I think this is exactly what you're speaking to. Like, it's the millions and millions and millions of little tiny connections and good energy that gets shared so that people feel good. And when more people feel good, they do good things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
One more thing, because I know we got to wrap this up.
Yeah. I mean,
So,
I'm loving it.
you know how it is on a podcast, a lot of times you don't get much feedback. So you're pouring yourself out there, you're putting yourself out there, and you don't hear anything. And it can be demotivating. And for me, the last few weeks have just been hard. I was an emotional tank on Monday. I'd been trying to get a podcast together for Tuesday morning. We release at 6 a.m. every Tuesday. And I wrote the thing 3 different times, and every time I sat down to record, it just wasn't right. And so I was pretty close to just saying, you know what, we won't have an episode Tuesday, forget it.
Mm.
So I guess that was on Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Monday morning, I got up and I opened LinkedIn, and there was this wonderful message from an assistant principal in California saying, your work does this for me. So it's so helpful. Thank you. Thank you. And that message is probably the only reason that we had a podcast come out on Tuesday, because that one person, right? Yeah. And she made a choice to interact with me. She didn't have to, but she made the choice to do that. And I think, again, that's the power we have. We can make these tiny little choices. We can take 5 minutes to fire off a message to somebody and say, hey, thanks, this was great. You really helped me today. Or we can take 5 seconds to notice that somebody, when we say, how are you? And they say, fine, we take that time, if we're present, and know that they didn't mean that. We can take a few seconds and say, okay, really, how are you? Right? We have those choices that we can make every day. And those choices actually matter. They make a difference.
They really do. They really, 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 really do. Well, I mean, what a great place to wrap up on. Wow. Thank you, Frederick, for spending this time with us, for helping reinforce the importance of like how we are just being. Because if when our sort of being is positive to others and is being present, it makes a massive difference. It's the only thing that it's the basically the only thing we can really do, right? Is like choose how we show up and show up that way. So thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. This has been a pleasure. And I think anytime we're able to talk about these kinds of things, I mean, this has been a gift for me too, right? Because it is always a battle to be present.
Mm.
And so this conversation helps me remember the things that are important and to realize too where I need to do some work like we all do.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, great. I'm glad that we got to spend this time together. I'm glad I'm sure it's been helpful for listeners. It's been a gift for me as well for very similar reasons to what you were just saying. And so for those of you listening and watching, you can find Frederick Buskey on the web at frederickbuskey.com. The link is in the show notes. And Frederick, you were saying before that you love when people email you. You love, love, love to hear from people. And so your email is frederick@frederickbuskey.com.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah. We do the work because we want to have impact on people's lives. And so if somebody wants to email me and just share a story or help me think about something or, whatever it is, I love getting email from people, not robots. I'm getting email from people.
Yep. Same here.
Please feel free.
You have a book coming out, and the subject is sort of on how time. Well, what you were saying was time is not the problem.
Time is not the problem, right? We try to create opportunities for us to be more present by trying to manage our time. But that will never work because what we need to do is manage our priorities. So instead of trying to take care of all the tasks so that we can be present, we need to be present.
Yeah. Do that first. Fill that cup.
Yeah.
And the other things will flow
because that's
from
the priority.
Yeah.
So now how do you get there? There's a whole series of stages to go through. And that's what the book is trying to help take people from that stage of I'm going to manage my time to the stage of I'm present.
Oh, beautiful. I can't wait to read it. I'm very excited for that to come out.
I hope March.
Yay.
Yeah. And if anybody's interested, certainly email me and I'll put you on a list or keep an eye on my website. I'm sure I'll have it plastered all over there when we get closer.
Excellent. Thank you, Frederick, for being here. Thank you so much for listening. Those of you who are here as we are wrapping up. It means a lot that you're here along on this ride. And I always end our show with a huge thank you as well for the 26-time winner of the Husband of the Year Award, Benjamin Kolp, who is our producer. He has been showing me how to do things like mixing the podcast and how to make it sound. How to make it sound half decent. So and he does so much else in our lives together that is just joyful and fun and supportive. And Ben, I feel really lucky to be along on this ride with you. Yeah. So here we are at the end of yet another episode, and I am sure I'm joined by Frederick and just wishing you really, really well. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.